Yes, so my name is Lien van Damme and I'm with the Center for International Environmental Law. And my statement was drafted in coordination with the trade union constituency, but is also supported by the environmental, Indigenous Peoples, youth and women and gender constituencies. The climate crisis is a human rights crisis and a deep injustice to current and future generations. Groups that have been historically marginalized, such as women and girls, Indigenous peoples, youth, children, and persons with disabilities, are disproportionately affected, and many workers, their families, and communities are among those most affected. Urgent climate policies, including to address loss and damage, need to promote and protect fundamental labor rights of freedom of association and collective bargaining, and have to be facilitated through social dialogue with workers at the table. The establishment of a loss and damage fund at COP27 was a historic step in the direction of protecting human rights in the context of climate-induced harm. The Transitional Committee now has the important task to operationalize the fund by COP28 as a key vehicle to provide remedy to frontline communities for the harms suffered, in line with states' human rights and labor rights obligations, and to provide tangible support. Civil society, Indigenous peoples, and frontline communities full, effective, direct, and meaningful and active participation is key at every stage of the negotiations, design, and implementation of the Loss and Damage Fund. We thank you for this opportunity to intervene on the first day of the first Transitional Committee meeting and stress that we expect meaningful engagement throughout the entire session and the future sessions. The limited time frame to nominate representatives for this first meeting made it difficult to effectively coordinate and ensure equitable representation across constituencies, and the lack of hybrid modalities for active remote participation puts additional constraints. Civil society, Indigenous peoples, youth groups, frontline communities, and the workers' movement should be front and center to these discussions to propose real and equitable solutions, rather than sitting in an overflow room or watching a webcast. These modalities do not allow for the variety of important voices to be heard in this process that is so crucial to frontline communities and their rights. As for the Transitional Committee's work plan, we expect you to develop concrete recommendations to operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund by COP28. Considering the urgency and the limited time, the Transitional Committee should focus its efforts on getting the fund up and running. The final outcome of this one-year process should be a governing instrument with clear objectives, principles, and operational modalities for an operating entity under the financial mechanism of the UNFCCC. The Loss and Damage Fund must be at the core of the funding arrangements for responding to loss and damage and be responsible for coordination and coherence. In terms of substance, we expect the fund to be rooted in human and labor rights. In practice, this means that the fund must address all aspects of loss and damage to provide effective remedy for frontline communities, families, and workers, meaning that its activities cover all impacts related to extreme weather events and slow onset events, and economic losses as well as non-economic losses. It also means that it protects the most impacted through rights-based, needs-based, and gender-responsive finance that is directly accessible to affected communities. It means that it allows for full, effective, direct, and meaningful stakeholder participation, including Indigenous peoples' rights to free, prior, and informed consent, transparency, access to information, and social dialogue with workers' organizations. And lastly, it also means that it puts in place effective social, environmental, and human rights safeguards and accountability mechanisms. Human rights institutions and authorities are increasingly providing guidance on upholding human rights in the context of climate harms. And the Transitional Committee should explicitly create synergies with this UN human rights system to align the important work happening here with the important work happening there. Additionally, just transition policies, such as social protection systems and social dialogue processes, as developed at the ILO, should be integrated in this work. Lastly, we highlight that the Loss and Damage Fund is currently an empty bucket and funding at scale is urgently needed. Rich countries with a historic responsibility for the climate crisis must deliver grants-based finance and new, innovative, and equitable sources of funding based on the polluter pays principle. They must be developed to ensure structural resourcing. The fund has been established, so these discussions and decisions should not wait. We expect discussions on the funding arrangements to be held during the Glasgow Dialogue and in other spaces throughout 2023 to focus on the urgent mobilization of new and additional resources at scale. We thank you and reiterate our availability to work with you throughout all the stages of the work of the Transitional Committee. Thanks.